Election's coming up in a few hours here, and you've got some people saying that the election has a Clinton has a 98% chance. Other people saying that she has a 70% chance. I actually don't think that you can meaningfully define a probability of winning. I don't think that that's a meaningful concept. Elections aren't based on skill. There's no referees. There's no bad plays. There's no outstanding plays. There's no human error. So there's not really a concept of chance. We can look at things like turnout. We can look at the accuracy of the polling. And we can measure error there. But I have a really hard time applying the idea of the concept of a probability to measuring the outcome of the election. Rather than coming up with a number that attempts to say that she has, that attempts to quantify her chances of winning, I would rather simply say this, that the polls suggest that she should win by a comfortable margin. However, despite the polls suggesting that she should win by a comfortable margin, I am still not convinced of the outcome. That secondary FBI release did not convince me of anything, except the existence of outside and perhaps downward pressure. It's really just evidence that there is a power struggle going on in the FBI, and perhaps, I think clearly, in the broader intelligence establishment, where there are people that seem to really want to try very hard to place Trump in power, and others that are trying to push back on that. So what is this number? What is this probability of winning? Well, in order to come up with this number, what they do is they run a simulation a large number of times and then count the outcomes. So what is a simulation? It's the assumption of the outcome, right? So they make a bunch of assumptions and then they test it. It's not a true probability in any sense, because they're coming up with all these assumptions and then making an imaginary distribution, because one does not exist in real life. They're not looking at things that existed, right? These are not trials. So if you want to know, how often does a vaccine have a specific effect, you could look at what's actually happened in the real world, and you could look at those trials and then say, okay, well, we gave the vaccine to 1,000 people, and 3 of them got sick, so it seems to be that you have a less than 1% chance of getting sick. You can't do the election 1,000 times. You can make a bunch of assumptions and then simulate it 1,000 times, but your outcome is only as good as your assumptions. Meaning that the probability distribution itself is not theoretical either. The assumptions, I suppose, are theoretical, but the distribution is not. It's more just like an opinion. It's an argument, right? And you generate numbers to back up your argument. But you're really ultimately, because the numbers are dependent upon your assumptions, which are subjective, it's persuasive, right? But it's not reflective of any broad concept of truth. And I might suggest that the tremendous volatility in the projections for what has been a very uneventful, stable polling event should be instructive, right? In the end, I think this is a minor point. It's the math that's important, not these oversimplified, probabilities of winning. What I think is that 538 is wrong about Arizona, and their models there are being pulled down by too much uniform swing. Meaning I think that the swing towards the Democrats in Arizona is larger than the national swing. But I otherwise would not really have much to say about what that map looks like. I think that map is mostly right. And if they only get one state wrong, then they're doing pretty well, right? I think that the people giving Clinton a very high probability of winning are fundamentally more right, even if the numbers they're assigning are meaningless, right? So let me be clear. Based purely on polling data, she has a 100% chance of winning. Which means that the analysis of the polling is that she's going to win, right? Saying she has a 63% chance of winning or a 78% chance of winning is just not meaningful. The polling suggests she should win. And putting a number on it doesn't make any sense, okay? So the people that are saying that it's like 98%, 98% doesn't mean anything. It's not any better or worse than 73%. But I think they're at least getting closer to the right idea, which is that if the numbers are right, then she should win in comfortably, substantially, right? That the question isn't whether she's going to win; it's going to be what her margin of victory is, right? Is she gonna just barely get the 270 or 272 or whatever it is in her firewall, or is she gonna get 300 and something, right? So why do people look at these numbers? Why do people look at this and say, this is a number, and I'm gonna attach myself to it. I'm gonna think this means something. I think the disconnect is that the public tends to look at statistics as a predictive science, when it should be interpreting predictive statistical analysis as a type of creative artistic expression. The reason is because whatever you get out of the algorithm is dependent on what you put into it, right? The way you should think about what a statistician does is as though they have a factory. They're working on a machine, right? They're machinists. And whatever you put through the machine is going to be very precise. But you've got to determine what it is that you're putting through the machine first. If you have a sausage machine and you put pancake mix into it, or if you have a pancake machine and you put a sausage into it, I'm trying to use very broken down assumptions here. Very intuitive conceptions of things, right? That's a better way to understand how a statistician works than to think of them as some kind of magician with science, right? They're out there with their crystal ball in the back, making magic potions. I kind of get the idea that that's kind of more the way people think of it, right? And they come out with a number at the end, and it's like they're the oracle, and it's not right, right? Sometimes we need to determine if a correlation exists. Then you're talking about things that are objective, right? Coming up with R, that's an objective thing, right? Just about anything else coming out of the field of stats is really just somebody's opinion because they're feeding all of the assumptions into the machine. All these movies that you've seen, that present these statisticians as like Egon on Ghostbusters as these or Spock or something, right? Data. This is really messing with the way that these things work, okay? The way I've often stated it is like this. The universe really doesn't give a fuck about your calculation. People in the literary fields and the social sciences especially are conditioned to separate arguments into those that are rhetorical, which are subjective, and those that are fact-based or empirical, and then defer to the experts when necessary. And that's good, right? I'm not going to walk around talking about psychology. I'm going to defer to a psychologist, right? But there's a tendency to interpret anything that presents itself quantitatively as fact-based and empirical, right? So if you're operating in a literary field or a social science, you are right to have this approach, right? You're right to say, let the physicists do the physics, and read their I'll read their essay. I can read an essay. I'm good at that, right? So I'll read their essay and then I'll understand it, but I'll let them do the work and I'll let them report to me. That's smart, right? That's an intelligent, that's an educated way to deal with things, is to let people focus on their specialties and, you know, write me the essay, I can read that. That's good. And it's good that people think like that, right? The last thing you need are, you know, people with English lit degrees trying to, you know, tell physicists what to do, right? And it works the other way around, of course, as well, right? But it's an error to correlate numbers with facts, and it's just a fallacy in reasoning that is very common from what I've been able to see, and I think probably a lot of people will back me up on this point. That when people with certain backgrounds or non-numerical backgrounds look at numbers, they see numbers as facts, right? And this is maybe ironic because, you know, if you're coming from an uneducated perspective, you're told your whole life to be suspicious of numbers, so you don't believe numbers at all, right? And broadly speaking, that's probably better than having too much faith in numbers. You know, it's almost Pythagorean. That's like a number mysticism, right? When you see numbers, you think that's a fact. When you see numbers, you think that's empirical. When statisticians give you numbers, they're usually not facts. And when statisticians give you numbers, they're usually not empirical. They're rhetorical. They live in a world that intersects numbers and rhetoric. And they use those numbers to advance arguments that are broadly subjective. And so you can get two statisticians that'll look at the same phenomenon and come up with completely different arguments. You will generally not get two physicists that will look at the same experiment and come up with different arguments, right? It's very different. And so you can imagine this human looking to the sky and saying, according to my calculations, there's a 73.7592 chance that, please bitch, is what the universe says as it looks down and flicks you away, you puny speck.